This is a custom setup analysis for the Mercedes CLK LM GT1 at Spielberg under these racing conditions. You won't want to miss it. Welcome back to the 27. It's going to be really hard to contain my excitement for this one because I found a game-changing setup adjustment for the CLK. But first, I have to ask you to promise to keep this a secret. If you're currently a subscriber or supporter, I trust you. It's the new guys. I don't know about you guys. The first step would be to hit subscribe. The second would be to comment, but absolutely do not hit the share button. These are tricks of the trade and we have to keep them to ourselves for now, so at least we can enjoy the benefit of them when multiplayer ranking system comes out. I also don't want to dangle the carrot too much. It's about the gearing, but let's talk about the CLK at Spielberg. It's the kind of car that really is so close but so far. I mean, the last little bit can be so difficult with setups, but now some of you may notice that I like to feature Spielberg with setups. A couple of reasons for this. I like the track and I'm relatively comfortable here, so I can push it a little bit more, but more importantly, every corner at Spielberg has a trick to it. It has its own unique character. Quick right-handers, hard braking, off camber, high speed. The elevation changes alone present particular loading and unloading issues. But when you get it right, and in particular, get it right with the right setup, you feel it in your bones. In the single-player racing context, Spielberg is set for 42C, which is extremely high, but for some reason I've never really had tire temp issues here. That might have something to do with the surface texture of the asphalt or the mesh, whatever you want to call it, but for the GT1s, they have so much power that just the load on them without slipping or spinning the rears even generates heat in its own right, and enough to make the rears a concern to keep your eyes on. Last week I discussed wheel slip angles and how that generates heat. Well, the GT1s are not immune from that either. So Spielberg is rather forgiving, but left unchecked, and you're going to be 1 or 2 seconds from a podium on lap 3 or 4. You're going to push a little bit, and it's going to be zippity-doo-dah around Roush. So before we talk about the gearing, we had to make the car mechanically sound first, because without that, there's a strong chance you'll be backwards and picking daisies. I thought the brake bias and ducts were just fine. I reduced the brake pressure a bit to equalize the braking wheel slip on the front and rear. The differentials were pretty far off. Way too much heat generating wheel slip. I mean, you could drive it and probably feel fast, but that's first lap hero stuff. You could potentially open them up a little bit if you have a sprint race, under 5 laps or that kind of context. Cambering is tricky here because there's so many high load turns, so the numbers on your HUD won't be perfect, but that's not uncommon. If the car and IMO aren't perfect because we've already maxed out the cambering on the car, then you just can't do it. That's on the car, not on us, so I'm content with it. Mechanically, the Merc was very close, but in little ways off. For the fronts, I made the front spring stiffer, but the roll bar softer. You don't want the car to bite too much on the initial turn in because it creates yaw that the car doesn't like. You want the turn to be just right so that when you enter the middle part of the corner, it's not out of shape, because that's when we're hitting the throttle. Which in this case, the car was a little too squirrely even after the differential changes. So some pretty hefty damping work was needed as well, because it was the transitions that the Merc just didn't feel like quite there. And what I mean by transitions are like when the body is rolling during initial turn in and when you're braking and accelerating. The dampers do a lot of work here. Each of those changes was tailored for this track, sometimes for a particular corner. So to complete the cornering phase, we softened the rear springs a bit, mainly for comfort, but also to give the car extra bite on acceleration, which we really did need. But because of the softer rear springs, the car had a tendency to squat a little bit more, so we raised the ride height by about 2 millimeters in the rear, which didn't help with the corner entry yaw, but this was done to balance the aero on the straights. I simply can't stand squatting, so we kind of had to trade Pokemon cards here. Now that we touched on the aero, this is our segue to that which was promised from above, that which the Mercedes engine manufacturers have bestowed upon us, and which we graciously accept with relish. You see that 1980s Last Starfighter rev limit indicator on the wheel? Yeah, you're going to ignore that. When you drive this thing, take a look at the telemetry HUD and note the horsepower per RPM. The peak power band for the Mercedes is way below the revlet indicator. Why? I don't know. I guess because it's not a shift indicator. Maybe it's just you're about to blow the engine indicator. The peak power band for this car is around 6,300 to 7,500. So when you're shifting, you'll be looking at the RPMs on the dash and not the wheel. If you use the rev indicator for shifting, you'll lose 10, 15, maybe 20 horsepower. So I geared the CLK to be match perfect for Spielberg. Take the setup to time trial, load up a Ghost, and watch. With the acceleration that we gained, this allowed us to pack on more downforce and still hit the same lap times. Now I'll give you a second to think about what more downforce does with regards to tire heat. That's right, you're going to be in the optimal temp window for the tires the whole race, while the competition is going to be struggling. At lap 3, 4, and 5, you'll be focused on breakpoints, apexes, and entry speed. They're going to be browning their pantaloons and barely keeping it on track. The setup is posted on the time trial leaderboards for a quick download. I was really tempted to shave off the downforce and turn this thing into a friggin' lightning bolt, but for you, I sacrificed my own glory and sim racing dreams. Alright guys, the Mercedes-Benz CLK LM at Spielberg. I hope you enjoyed the setup. I'll be wrapping up the GT3s at Brand soon. Also, I think I'm going to be taking a spin around Kansai in the McLaren, so stay tuned. In the meantime, take care.